What I have here in my hand is a great T-Motor product, which is medium priced for the medium tier, which actually then fits the pro pilots and also fits whoever actually wants to enter into the hobby. And this is an F7 45 amp stack, which basically means it has an F7 flight controller and a 45 amp Velox ESC. You can go 87, you can go 60 amps, but what makes this T-Motor stack special? Stay tuned, because all of us definitely want the answer to, do you really want to taste it? So what we have here is the T-Motor F7 F45 amp V2.0. So the ESC is the Velox, but the F7 is the T-Motor F722 flight controller. And it actually is analog, but I would prefer analog flight controllers compared to HD, because then with analog flight controllers you can definitely just change it over to HD if you want to, but you can't do the other way around. So unboxing a little bit, let's see what's inside. Okay, not stickers, but just advertisement stuff. Okay, we'll allow it. And this is the ESC. This is the ESC, which I actually think is reminiscent of Iron Man, with the Iron Man's power source, with the heatsink just gives that luxurious feel. It has big pads. One thing I think that's great about this design is the fins. The fins here, during flight, basically the fins will then create some turbulence and increase the ability of cooling down the internal electronics. That's great, right? So you want as much cooling as possible, and I think the heatsink then not only disperses the heat throughout, so it's not concentrated only on the FETs, but it also provides that airflow, the important airflow. Bottom here, you have these big FETs with these capacitance added. So how many is there? 29. Okay, so I think this is an actually fan favorite. So what you would do is just typically just solder it off to your motors and solder it on your capacitor. You have the capacitor holes right there. Oh, by the way, this ESC is a BL32 ESC. So now what you have is the flight controller. Okay, maybe you will just get the accessory out of the way first. Okay, the screws. It has screws. Okay, the connectors and gummies and race wires. It comes with race wires. Wow, talk about value for the money, right? And your XC60, nice beefy XC60 connector with how many EWG is that? That's 12 EWG. So made for raw power. Very good. Okay, it has the ESC side. Goes into the ESC side. It says ESC side. The flight controller side would go into the flight controller side. Why does it come loose like this? Because you then would have the opportunity to either use the connector for T-Motor, or you can actually then just get a loose connector. Let me see whether they gave the loose connector or not. So here they have the loose connector right there. So what you would do then is just take the loose connector, and then depending on the configuration of your other ESC, you just putting these connectors in and then plugging it accordingly. So I need differencing out. Okay. Capacitor they have is a 35 volts 470. Okay, so and then use these holes right there, plug that in. This is the negative side, the painted side is negative, or the shorter leg is negative. You just solder that in like so, and then you can either have a choice of what they gave you here, 35 volts 470 microfarad, or you can use 1000 microfarad, or you can actually even go up one notch, go 50 volts 470 microfarad or 1000 microfarad. It's up to you. Alright, now so let's look at the flight controller. Okay, so this is an analog flight controller. It has an OSD on, but like I told you, you can actually just convert it to HD, no problem. But I'll cover that right at the end. So at the top here, you will have ground, power, camera control. So if you have camera control capable camera, that would be great. You have video in, you have video out, which is for your BTX. UART3 for your smart audio or tramp, power and ground. And you have these jumpers right here. So if you don't solder the jumpers right there, you will not be able to supply any power. So in this case, you can either, and the power back right here, if you jump the pads, center pad to the right pad, you get battery. From the center pad to the left pad, you get 5 volts. So the same on the jumper pads for the BTX, depending on what you're using. For example, if you're using the Speedy BTX 800, you'll be using 5 volts. So you jump those pads to get 5 volts. If you're using anything else like Rush Ultimate or TBS Unify, you'll be using that. So here on the right side, you have pads for RSSI, PPM, UART-TX, RX, 3.3, 5 volt ground. So whenever you see 3.3 or 5 volts, then typically this is where your receiver goes. 3.3 would be if you're utilizing Spectrum. So if you're using Spectrum, you'll be 3.3, but 5 volts is usually the go-to for either Crossfire, Free Sky, or Express RS. So the connector here is where we connected before. You see the flight controller side. We go in here, alright. The connections are, if you can read that, is going to be ground, battery, and then NC means no connection. And then the motors 4, 3, 2, 1. So that's the 4, 3, 2, 1 motors or ESCs. You have ADC for currents, and then you have UART4 if you want telemetry coming from the ESC. Nowadays, nobody really cares because with bidirectional D-shot, you'll have the same information, so you don't really need telemetry. So I typically wouldn't even bother turning it on. Okay, so on the bottom left, you have the LED strip. You have buzzer negative, you have buzzer plus or 5 volts, and then ground. So this is where you connect your LED and buzzers. And then on the top side is you have the other UARTs where you would connect your GPS, and usually you know it's GPS if you have ground, 5 volts, and then you have this SDA SCL with the I2C pads for your GPS connection, especially when you use compass, and you have UART4. So in this case, UART4 is free if you do not use UART4 RX here for telemetry. So that by doing that and using bidirectional D-shots and not using the telemetry on ESC, you basically gain a UART. So the main control chip is the F722 STM32 F722 RAT6. The gyroscope is an MTU 6000. That's your gyroscope right there. It doesn't have odometer. You have the RAM on board, which is 16 megabytes, and the input voltage is 3 to 6S, so don't use 8S with this. And the BEC, of course, as you've seen here, it supplies 5 volts and up to 2 amps. So the mounting pattern is 30 by 30, and when you update the firmware, if you want to try 4.3 for example, just remember always use the 10.8 configurator, but 4.3 is out as a release candidate. If you wanted to do that, the firmware is going to be T-Motor F7 under beta flight. All UARTs will support telemetry in S-Bus. Because this is F7, you don't have to find an S-Bus pad. The way that I would propose is you put this interference pad right in the middle right there. So I know that this looks great on top right there. But what I would do is actually put it in between, sandwich in between. Alright, so there's not much more to tell about this package. Oh, the last one is going to be how would you connect DJI HD? Because it doesn't have a DJI HD connector. So what you would do is actually find a spare UART. So just now you didn't use the RX4 UART, you used the R4 and UART4 TX. So in the case of you want to use DJI HD, either the Air Unit or the Kinex Vista, the issue is you don't have actually the BEC. And BEC is the battery elimination circuit. You want to have either up to 4S for Air Unit or up to 6S for the Kinex Vista. Technically with the 6S, you could just go ahead and use this BTX pads right there because you're not using it for an analog BTX, you're just using it for the Calyx Vista. You could then cross the bats, jump the bat pads, and then provide it to the Calyx Vista. So the Calyx Vista will work, and you just connect it to the spare UART that we just miraculously got just now from the RX4 and TX4. So there's something amazing about the Velox 45 amp ESC. It actually has a 10 volt BEC coming out of the ESC. The only thing you need to do now is actually just connect a wire to that 10 volt BEC and then connect it to your Calyx Vista or air unit. If you actually had a T-Motor HD flight controller, you could just plug it in. But in this case, because it's analog, then you just have to wire it manually. But that's fine because it's easy enough to do. Or if you wanted to use 4S instead, if you wanted a 9 volt or 12 volt filtered battery supply, then you would actually get something like a Matek BEC, where you can then wire up the battery power coming from the flight controller and then provide it to the Calyx Vista like so, or even the air unit like so. So you'd be then not just down-stepping the voltage, but also providing a filtered power over to protect the Calyx Vista and protect the air unit. So technically then, it bypasses the OSD. You're just reading the MSP information coming from RX4 and TX4, and then the image will just go directly from the air unit to your goggles. So this flight controller is versatile. You can use it for analog, you can use it for HD, and to me, that's a great plus. Have you ever been on a racetrack and suddenly your fellow pilot yells, "Ah, my video!" What you need is pit mode. Jump the pit mode pad so that you have pit mode, and then you can set up your radio and use the CLI commands in order to get this feature. This is gonna do for today. Bye bye.